Hey everyone, I'm Demetrius Charles. I'm excited to talk about Emma's Griffin Liberty Dawn. I'm going to address questions 1, 3, 5, and 6 today. We're going to cover Griffin's central argument, dig into whether autobiographies are a reliable historical source, and then connect all of this to something we are living through right now. The first question prompts us to reflect on Griffin's argument. So, what is her argument? When most people think about the Industrial Revolution, they imagine factories, harsh working conditions, and exploitation. Historians like Frederick Engels even argue that workers lost the simpler and more secure lives they once had. And E.P. Thompson described factory life as long hours of difficult work under strict discipline for goals that didn't belong to the workers themselves. Because of views like these, this negative interpretation has shaped how we understand the Industrial Revolution for over 150 years. Griffin's argument is that this is not what the workers themselves said. She goes back to the primary source, over 350 working class autobiographies, handwritten notebooks, memoirs, histories, and life histories written by the men and women who actually lived through industrialization. And what she finds is the dawn of liberty. Before industrialization, the pre industrial economy was frankly brutal in a different way. There wasn't enough work. Masters had total power because workers were desperate. Griffin writes that men like the early 18th century writer Edward Barlow couldn't even quit a bad job because what other choices did he have? Industrial change that factories, mines, railways, and growing cities created genuine demand for labor. And when workers are needed, workers have leverage. Griffin shows us men working off jobs over tea breaks, over the milk supplier their master required them to use, and finding new employment the same afternoon. That's the kind of freedom agricultural agricultural workers could barely imagine. That is the dawn liberty, a tangible, felt expansion of choices, dignity, and autonomy for people at the very bottom. Moving on to the third question. Are, are autobiographies even a reliable window into ordinary working class life? And this is really important methodologically. And this is a really important methodological question that Griffin takes head on. Critics assert that only the usual literate, usual ambitious worker wrote an autobiography. So are these really representatives of silent majority? Griffin pushes back, I think, convincingly. She argues that the autobiographies came from every corner of working class life, from unskilled laborers, miners, weavers, and factory workers, and many of them describe their early illiterate selves. So we get accounts of people who started life unable to read or write. That's not self-selected elite, but a broad band of working experience. At the same time, Griffin acknowledges limitations. She points out that far fewer autobiographies were written by women, which means female experiences are harder to study throughout this method. She explains that this absence was partially due to limited education and cultural expectations about women's roles. Even with these limits, autobiographies are valuable because they give us something rare in history. Ordinary people are speaking in their own voice instead of being described by officials or elites. Moving on to question 5. The autobiography voice that stood out to me the most was John Lincoln, whose story opens the book. His life shows both hardship and resilience. As a child, he experienced extreme poverty and had to work from a young age. At one point, he described how his master's wife injured him by striking him with a hemp rail, showing how vulnerable child workers could be. Later in life, he experienced deep personal loss when illness killed both his children. He wrote that if we were unhappy before, we were doubly unhappy now. This moment really stood out to me because it shows the emotional reality of working class life. not just economic statistics. But what surprised me is that the story is not only tragic. Griffin explains that Lincoln eventually found meaning through religion and community. His story reflects hope and personal growth, not just suffering. This challenged my assumptions because I expected most autobiographies from this period to focus mainly on exploitation and misery. Instead, many writers describe complex lives with both struggles of opportunities. Final question 6. Final question, question 6. Question 6 asks us to reflect on the any parallels to our own era of technology disruption. Griffin describes industrialization as a disruptive liberty, genuine freedom in emerging through economic chaos, not after it settles down. Sound familiar? We are watching AI eliminate entire job categories in real time. Copywriters, paralegals, and graphic designers, coders, their skills are being replaced by machines. Griffin describes workers like Joseph Gutteridge, whose weaving community collapsed overnight. But here's what Griffin's framework focuses us to ask. Where is the new demand for labor creating new leverage? Because that was the flip side of industrialization. It destroyed old work and created entirely new categories of work that no one had imagined. The more uncomfortable questions Griffin raises is economic turmoil always a condition for social liberation? Her answer, I think, is yes. Historically, for the working class, greater freedom came through disruption. The chaos created conditions where workers could say, like George Mitchell, walking off a farm in 1846, 14 shilling a week is better than 7. Whether that dynamic holds in the AI era depends on whether new demand for human labor emerges. Griffin gives us an incredible sharp framework for asking a question. So to wrap up, Griffin's Liberty Dawn is an argument about what we chose to listen to. When we count wages and measure calories, we get one story. When we read John Lincoln's story, we get another. Both are true. Neither is complete. What makes Griffin's book so worthy of reading is that it insists of the humanity and complexity of people history has treated as statistics. Thank you for watching and listening to me.